Welcome to Woman's Secret Signals. This is the channel where silence speaks louder than words and hidden emotions finally come into the light. Because what you think women are saying is often not what they truly mean. And what you think is rejection might actually be fear. What you think is distance might actually be protection. And what you think is confusion might actually be emotional testing you never noticed. Here, we decode the invisible side of female psychology, the subtle signals, the unspoken emotions, and the hidden patterns that shape attraction, love, and relationships. So, if you've ever felt confused by mixed signals, if you've ever wondered what she's really thinking, or if you've ever lost someone without understanding why, you are exactly where you need to be. Because once you understand the signals, you stop guessing and you start seeing the truth behind every action. There is a truth most people never talk about in relationships, not because it isn't real, but because it makes people uncomfortable. It's not about love, it's not about attraction, and it's definitely not about money. It's something deeper, something emotional that quietly shapes how people behave in relationships, how they test partners, and how they protect themselves without even realizing it. Before we go any further, understand this. This is not about blaming anyone or labeling one group of people. This is about understanding human emotional psychology, especially how fear influences connection, attachment, and trust. Now, here is the truth. Many women, just like men, don't fear relationships themselves. They fear what happens emotionally inside them when they fully invest in the wrong person, because emotional investment is powerful. When a woman genuinely cares, she doesn't just like someone. She attaches, she observes, she feels, she plans, and she starts imagining a future even before she says it out loud. And that's where the fear begins, not the fear of love, but the fear of misplaced love, the fear of giving loyalty, energy, and emotional depth to someone who will not value it in the same way. Because once emotional attachment grows, it becomes harder to leave, harder to detach, harder to rebuild yourself after disappointment. So, what looks like confusion, mixed signals, or emotional distance in early stages of dating is often not disinterest. It's assessment, a quiet internal question. Is this person emotionally safe for me or not? And here is where most people misunderstand the situation. They assume distance means lack of interest. They assume testing means games. They assume caution means rejection. But in reality, it often means emotional protection. Because the biggest fear is not heartbreak alone. It's regret after emotional investment. It's the thought of, I gave my time, my trust, my loyalty, and it was not valued. This is the silent emotional layer most people never talk about openly, but it influences almost every decision in modern relationships. And once you understand this, everything starts to make sense. Why people pull away, why they test consistency, why they watch actions more than words, why emotional safety matters more than attraction. But this is only the beginning. Most people assume relationships fail because of lack of love, but psychology tells a different story. Relationships don't usually collapse because love disappears. They collapse because trust never fully formed in the first place, or it got broken too early. And this is where the deeper emotional fear begins. When someone starts to care, their mind doesn't immediately focus on how strong is this love. Instead, it quietly starts asking, can I trust this person with my emotions? Because love without trust is unstable. It creates anxiety instead of peace. Now, here's the part most people miss. Many women don't fear love itself. They fear the pattern of inconsistency that sometimes comes with it. One day, attention, next day, distance. One moment, emotional closeness. Next moment, confusion. Promises that sound strong, but actions that don't fully match. This inconsistency creates emotional uncertainty, and uncertainty is what triggers self-protection. When emotional safety feels unstable, the mind naturally switches into observation mode. She starts noticing everything: How consistent are his actions? Does he follow through on what he says? Does he stay the same in private and in public? Is the effort balanced or one-sided? This is not overthinking. This is the brain trying to reduce emotional risk. Because once emotional attachment starts forming, the fear is no longer, will I get love? It becomes, will I lose myself in someone who cannot hold my emotions responsibly? That is the real psychological shift. And this is why many women become selective, slow to open up, or emotionally reserved in the beginning stages of relationships. It's not a game, it's emotional filtering. Because past experiences also play a powerful role. One disappointing relationship can train the mind to be more cautious in the next one, not because the next person is the same, but because the emotional system remembers pain faster than pleasure. So even genuine interest can come with hesitation. And this is where most misunderstandings happen. One side feels she is pulling away, while the other side is simply trying to avoid emotional risk. But there is a deeper layer still because trust is not only about avoiding pain, it is about predictability of emotional behavior. And when predictability is missing, emotional fear quietly grows. When emotional fear becomes active, it doesn't always show up as words. Most of the time, it shows up as behavior that people misread completely. On the surface, it can look confusing, sometimes even contradictory, but underneath it, there is a very simple psychological process happening. Self-protection before emotional investment deepens. One of the most common behaviors is testing. Not dramatic tests or manipulation, but subtle observation of consistency. For example, how someone reacts under pressure, how they communicate when they are busy, or whether they show effort without being reminded. This is not about playing games. It's about answering one internal question. Is this person emotionally stable enough for me to depend on? Another common behavior is emotional pacing, opening up slowly instead of all at once. When someone has emotional fear, they don't rush vulnerability. They release it in layers. A little trust first, then a little more, and then more, only if it feels safe. To someone on the outside, this can feel like distance or lack of interest. But internally, it's actually the opposite, interest with caution. Then there is the behavior of withdrawal. Sometimes a person becomes quieter, less responsive, or emotionally reserved after feeling unsure. This is often misunderstood as rejection, but psychologically, it can be a reset mechanism, a way for the mind to step back and reassess. Am I safe in this connection, or am I losing control emotionally? Because emotional investment is not just romantic, it is also psychological exposure. And exposure without safety creates anxiety. Another key behavior is overanalysis of actions. Words alone are no longer enough. Everything is measured through patterns. Consistency over time, emotional availability, effort without pressure, stability during conflict. This is because the brain is trying to reduce emotional uncertainty by focusing on behavior rather than promises. And here is the most important point. These behaviors are not signs of disinterest. They are signs of emotional risk management. But unfortunately, many relationships break down here. One side sees caution and assumes lack of love. The other side feels misunderstood and pulls away. And the emotional gap slowly grows. What makes this even more complex is that emotional fear doesn't always stay quiet. If triggered repeatedly, it can turn into emotional detachment as a defense mechanism, not because feelings disappear, but because feeling too much without safety becomes overwhelming, and once that stage begins, it becomes harder to rebuild connection. But this is not the end of the story. If emotional fear is the problem, then emotional safety is the solution. But emotional safety is not created through big promises, emotional speeches, or intense declarations of love. It is built through something much quieter and much more powerful, consistent behavior over time. At the core of female psychology in relationships, emotional safety is not about perfection. It is about predictability. When a person's behavior is stable, the mind relaxes. When it is unstable, the mind stays alert. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. Anyone can be highly affectionate in the beginning. Anyone can send strong messages, show excitement, or create emotional highs. But what truly reduces emotional fear is whether that energy remains steady when life becomes normal, stressful, or routine. Because emotional safety is tested in ordinary moments, do they communicate consistently without being reminded? Do they stay respectful during disagreement? Do they remain emotionally present even when busy? Do their actions stay aligned with their words over time? These patterns quietly answer the mind's biggest question. Can I relax with this person, or do I have to stay emotionally alert? And the moment someone feels they can relax, emotional fear begins to decrease naturally. Another important factor is emotional clarity. Confusion is one of the strongest triggers of emotional insecurity. Mixed signals, unclear intentions, or inconsistent affection create mental stress because the brain tries to fill in the gaps. But when intentions are clear, even if they are simple, the mind stops guessing. Clarity creates calmness. Calmness creates trust. Trust creates attachment. Another key element is emotional responsibility. This means owning behavior instead of avoiding accountability. When someone can say, I was wrong, or I understand how that felt, it signals emotional maturity. And emotional maturity reduces fear more than attraction ever can, because attraction creates desire, but emotional maturity creates safety, and safety is what allows deeper connection to grow without anxiety. There is also something subtle but very powerful: emotional presence. Not just being physically available, but mentally and emotionally engaged in conversations, moments, and experiences. When someone feels truly seen, they stop feeling the need to protect themselves constantly, and slowly the guard comes down. But here is the deeper truth most people overlook: emotional safety is not built in one moment. It is built through repeated emotional experiences that confirm again and again that there is no hidden danger in the connection. And once that belief forms, emotional fear fades quietly in the background. But even then, one final layer remains. Even in healthy relationships, emotional fear doesn't completely vanish. It softens, it quiets down, it becomes less controlling. But in most people, it still exists in the background as a protective instinct. Because emotional fear is not just learned, it is human. It is the mind's way of preventing deep emotional damage. And once someone has experienced disappointment, inconsistency, or emotional loss, that memory doesn't get erased. It gets stored. So even when a relationship feels safe, the brain still occasionally checks for danger. Not because something is wrong, but because it wants to make sure nothing repeats from the past. This is why even strong relationships sometimes experience moments of doubt, silence, or emotional withdrawal. These moments are not always about the present, they are often echoes of the past. And here is the deeper psychological truth: emotional fear becomes louder whenever there is uncertainty, emotional distance, or change in behavior patterns. Even small shifts can activate old emotional memories: a delayed response, a change in tone, a sudden emotional distance, a lack of usual attention. These do not automatically mean something is wrong in the relationship, but the mind interprets them through previous emotional experiences. This is why communication becomes extremely important in long-term relationships, because silence is where fear grows, clarity is where fear reduces. Another important truth is that emotional fear is not eliminated by reassurance alone. It is reduced through repeated emotional evidence over time. One apology does not erase insecurity. One promise does not erase doubt. One good moment does not erase emotional memory. But consistent behavior slowly rewrites emotional expectation. And that is how trust becomes stable. There is also a deeper transformation that happens in emotionally safe relationships. Fear shifts from, what if I get hurt, to, I feel secure enough to try again. That shift is everything, because it changes love from something anxious into something peaceful. And when love becomes peaceful, it becomes more stable, more mature, and more real. So the final truth is this: women don't fear love. They don't fear connection. They don't even fear emotional depth. What they fear most is emotional unpredictability, because unpredictability creates emotional risk, and emotional risk activates self protection. But when consistency, clarity, and emotional maturity are present, fear slowly fades into trust, and trust becomes the foundation of everything that follows. Because in the end, the strongest relationships are not built on intensity. They are built on emotional safety that makes both people feel understood, secure, and calm enough to stay.